Thank you.
So our speaker today will be focusing on three areas of Rotary International's areas of focus: supporting education, growing local economies, and saving the environment. Henry Bierlink is a Linden native who operated a Linden dairy farm for several years, earned his Master's of Arts in Political Science from Western, and has over 30 years of engagement in agriculture and public policy. Henry currently serves as the administrator of the Ag Water Board, a facilitating entity for 6 watershed improvement districts, irrigation districts, located in Whatcom County. He also serves as the executive director of the Washington Red Raspberry Commission and the Washington Seed Potato Commission. I count Henry as a dear friend who cares deeply about the health of Whatcom County and its citizens. Henry, welcome back to the Rotary Club of Bellingham, and you have the floor. Peter, if you can give him presentation privileges. And Henry, if you can unmute yourself. Henry, you need to unmute yourself.
Mute. All right, finally got it. Sorry, it took me a second here. I've got too many screens open. So, and I should get video open too. Let's see. Start video.
We can hear you now, Henry, and
you
now
got
see
me.
your beautiful face.
No, I wouldn't say that, but
Handsome face, excuse me.
Let's see what we got here in terms of getting the screen up. So I do have, I had it up a minute ago, but now, okay. Share screen. Do you have my screen or not? No, not yet.
We're looking at a list of files.
This the list of files. That's what you got. Okay.
Okay.
Let's get to this one. Get it started. How about there?
There, that's it.
Better? All right. All right. Finally, thank you. So, hey, it's a privilege to be with you. Thank you, Paul, for inviting me. And it is good to be seeing you and hearing you once again. It's been a while, but it's good times together, working together for several years ago in ag. And as Paul mentioned, I've got several different hats that I've wore here in agriculture and still continue to. And I really enjoy getting the chance to share a little bit about what we're doing. And my title is to kind of let you know what Whatcom Farms and are we alive? And we are alive, but are we well? Those are some questions. What I'm hoping to do today is kind of go through these items. And by the end of this presentation and questions, you have a better idea of where we are, who we are, what our value is, why we matter to the rest of the community. It's not just us, obviously, we care about what we do, but how it matters to the community as well. And then what our future is going to be and has been, and what really our challenges are and what are we doing about them. So if I can get through all that in the next 15, 20 minutes, that would be great. And hope you have some good questions for me to kind of pin me down, and I'll be happy to answer questions that way too. So who are we? First of all, we are really in a lot of ways an extension of the Fraser Valley. If you look at a map of this area, you got Bellingham down here, Linden in the middle, but you see that we really are part of the Fraser Valley system. We are more connected really to the lower mainland than we are in a lot of ways to the rest of agriculture in the state of Washington. And that gets really interesting because a lot of our berry farmers, and I'll talk a bit more about that, are cross-border farmers. In fact, more than half of our berry farmers are Canadian citizens. That's something you may not know, but that I will let you in on that. It may not be the biggest acres, but a lot of farmers are crossing that border and have been crossing the border this year, despite the COVID limitations. This is the zoning map for Whatcom County. You can see the green is the agricultural zone. That's the area we're trying to preserve for farming, making sure that we have a farmland base. And that is a big question on these productive valleys on the West Coast. But what typically happens is that we have a lot of great agriculture, but there's a lot of competing uses, residential, industrial. I look at the Kent Valley, Puyallup Valley, those valleys as valleys that were prime agricultural areas not that long ago. They're not anymore. And the question will be, is Whatcom County destined for that as well? We hope not. We are shooting to keep 100,000 acres of productive agricultural land. 87 of that is somewhat protected in the ag zone, and we've been looking in these rural zones for some really where there's still a lot of farming going on in some of these. And there's been some talk about an Ag 5 or an Ag 10 or something like that, where we can still intentionally protect agriculture in those areas. Hoping to get to that 100,000 acres of protected land. We are also challenged by 4,000 undeveloped densities in all this area. We could have 4,000 more houses out there in the middle of agricultural land if we don't do some of these things wisely. And you know how that works. If somebody puts in a multi-million-dollar mansion with a few llamas in the middle of an agricultural field, that really affects not only that land, but also all the farms around there, because they don't tend to like pesticide spraying or manure applications. And those are ongoing challenges for us. Whatcom County agriculture, what is it? How does it look? It's still dominated by dairy. About 50% of our value is in dairy, and about 30% in fruit, and some of the other odds and ends. Also, it's pretty diverse, but still dominated by those two. Fruits, mostly berries. And this shows just the last 10 years of ag census. Every 5 years, the federal government does an ag census. The last one was in 2017, where you see about half of it is dairy. About a good third, another third is in the berry category. 10 years ago, dairy was about 70%, and berry about maybe 15, 20. You've seen over the last 10 years, there's been a strong movement from dairy into berry. And the other areas are seed potatoes and greenhouse. I'll talk a bit about that. If you look at the land, the 100,000 plus acres that we are in productive capacity, a lot of it still in dairy grasses, silage for cows, the corn for cows, about 15,000 acres in berries, another 3,000 in really seed potatoes in this, and some vegetables and row crops. And then there's a bunch of pasture land as well in here to kind of fill in the gaps. We are about $370 million in farm gate value. We were in 17, that's gone up since. It's consistent value, growth in the value of agriculture. We're first of all the counties in the west side of the state, and sixth of all the 39 counties in the state. In the top 5% of all the farm counties in the U.S. And 97% are still family farms in this area. We've a couple corporate farms, but that's an aberration rather than the norm. And about 2, 3, probably growing number organic certified, but it is very hard to grow organic in a wet environment like we have right here. But we do have a few that are certified and working to make that work. Who are we? Dairy still remains the biggest part of it. Dairy Gold Cooperative grew up in Linden. It is now it's a multi-state region. It's Washington, Oregon, Idaho, into Western Montana, I think a little bit into Utah, maybe Northern California. It's one of the larger dairy cooperatives in the nation now. But it still has a nice bunch of people in Linden. We also have a couple organic valley, organic farms that work really closely with Dairy Gold. They have a pretty good cooperative relationship. And some anaerobic digesters, and just some of the issues going on with the dairy community. But you can see the difference in history. In 1950, we had over 3,000 dairies in this county, in Whatcom County. That was the time before bulk milk came in. Bulk milk came in around the early 60s or late 50s, and you can see the huge drop. And since then, it's been going down, down, down to now under 100 herds in this county. Cow numbers have remained pretty constant, although they're kind of dwindling a little bit to going down. We are a berry county. We grow over 80% of North America's frozen raspberries. And they're not frozen when they come off, but that's where they go for us. We pick at the peak of ripeness and put them in the freezer, and they are then immediately froze and then shipped around the world throughout the year. So that's our industry. When you go to the grocery store and look for fresh raspberries, they're probably coming out of California or Mexico, depends on where, throughout the year. Even in Linden, in July, you'll find fresh berries from Mexico or California. We go 99.9% of our berries get in the freezer right away. And that's because we have a season. We can only grow for about 6 to 8 weeks, whereas these other areas are able to figure out how to put fresh berries on the shelf 365 days a year. So we concentrate on the frozen market. That's 98% of our, or more now, really are frozen and marketed throughout the world. Blueberries, also a big part of the grow. It's the fastest growing portion of the industry here, but it's also fastest growing throughout the world. Blueberries have had a pretty good story to tell health-wise. They're a lot easier to grow. You only have to pick them about 2 or 3 times, and then like raspberries have to be picked about 15 times through the season. They're a pretty nice crop. They've made a fair amount of money over the years, but that worldwide competition is really increasing all around the world. And now that our blueberry farmers are kind of at the break-even level with production costs and prices. We're also a certified seed potato growing area. That's probably not something that people are aware of, but our area grows strictly for seed. We do not grow for the commercial potato market. Skagit does, Eastern Washington does, California, but we grow a lot of the seed that those farmers use to plant and then to produce the commercial crops. So we have a highly regulated little area where you have to produce a very high quality berry, and it's in the early, or not berry, but potato, in the early stages of the whole, taking it from tissue culture through all the different stages. And this is an area where we are geographically kind of isolated by the ocean, the mountains, the Skagit, or the Samish Highlands, and then by the 49th parallels. So we have sort of an isolated area, and we've taken advantage of that to have a seed potato growing area. And of course, nurseries. We have some significant nurseries in this area too: Smith Gardens, Van Wingerden's, Pacific Growers, and others. They're not a huge part of our industry, but significant. And of course, I can't neglect the Bellingham Farmers Market. It's probably our first step to how people interact with agriculture in this county. And it's a really great farmers market, and I'm sure hopefully some of you had spent many good Saturdays in the market. And we have some vertical integration going on here. Sampson Estates Winery, a couple other wineries coming along, Bellwood Acres with cider and hard cider. But for the most part, our farmers are producing kind of a commodity that then is made into other products. That's true of course, milk, and also a lot of the berries as well. So you get the idea that we really do have a versatile area. We have a lot of different crops. We have good different soils. We can grow a lot of things here and do. Who are we? Really, I look at about 3 major ethnic groups that are fit within our agricultural circles. The dairy farmers, boy, that's kind of my background. I grew up in a dairy in this area, dairied myself for a while, and I've got Dutch heritage. And almost 95% of the dairy farmers in this area trace themselves back to some Dutch heritage. I don't know why that is, but it's true all around the nation, really. Well, Dutch people like dairy. So that is true here in Whatcom County as well. And we have our berries, really our dominant culture in the berries are the Punjabi, from the Punjabi region of India. Most of the farmers are Punjabi. Most of them came from the Punjabi region to Canada and then came across the border to us. And some still go back and forth. We have several from Missouri area too, the Mayberries, the Enfields and so forth, track back to there. But in terms of numbers, most of our berry farmers are rooted in the Punjabi region of India. And then a lot of the farm workers are really, as you probably suspect, they're Hispanic. They have typically stayed in the fields. They've really done a great job. They're a huge part of the community here and an integral part of the community. And family, as I mentioned, not many corporate farms, still a lot of family-centric farms. Most of the farms we have are based in strong families. So how are we doing? I guess that's the next question. And what are we up against? It's interesting that most farmers throughout history, the big challenge, of course, was weather. How weather patterns, then of course, prices are always been and those things are still true for us too. But frankly, most of our farmers now, when we talk about our challenges, it's about public policy, about how policy is being put into place, how it's interpreted. So we find ourselves struggling with land policies, with water policies, and labor policies. And these are the things that we tend to work on quite a bit. It's been pretty hard to change the weather. And it's very hard to change international pricing on a lot of things when you're in a global market. But these are the things that we work on quite a bit here in our industry, about land, about access, affordability, about how to interpret property rights, working with the county comprehensive land use plan and the Ag Advisory Committee, purchased and the transfer development rights programs, right to farm. These are all items that we're constantly working on. And then on water rights, drainage, flood management, and water quality. And in labor, the cost of labor, the availability of it, housing, childcare related to that, unionization. And of course, this last year to deal with COVID was a really interesting challenge. I'm picking two here because these are the two that are most on our mind right now, in the labor cost and in water rights. And I want to elaborate a bit on these. In water, there has been a long-term dispute about who really should have access to all the water in the area. We do have a lot of water. We 9 months of the year, we're trying to drain water, but the other 3-4 months of the year, we need good irrigation to be able to put that productive land to good use. And the challenge is, where do we take enough water out of the streams to make them really hurt for fish and habitat? The tribes certainly have some legitimate concerns about how water is managed. And we have been working for many years to try to address those issues. Right now, there is a request from the tribe, both Nooksack and Lummi, to file a state water right adjudication. That's a big process. They just finished one in the Yakima. Took 40 years of time, many millions of dollars on both the state pocket and the privates that tried to work on that issue. Lawyers literally had children grow up and come back and work with them. In a couple generations of lawyers made good money on that adjudication process. We are really reluctant to jump into that. We are pushing a more collaborative approach. The county executive has put forward a pretty good draft of that we're trying to build on. Builds on what we've been advocating for a lot of years, a drainage-based management approach, looking at a drainage like the Bertrand or 10 Mile and something, and look at it and address it for multiple different goals. And it's certainly, having enough water in the streams for fish is a given, and it has to happen. Tribes have a legal right to that, and we want to make sure they continue to have that potential. But we also need enough water if we're going to have farmland, that 100,000 acres protected. It has to be able to compete and be viably farmed, and it needs water to be able to do that. We're convinced we have the water here. It's the question of how we manage it. And we'd much prefer doing it in a collaborative way than going through a water rights adjudication, which is a legal court, superior court action that will take us another 30, 40 years and multi-millions of dollars, and really only address one aspect of this whole big issue, and that is who has the water rights more senior than the others. We can get into that a little bit more later, because we have been working on that for years. We've organized watershed improvement districts, which are irrigation districts. We put this together knowing that we'd have to manage some of these things in a more holistic way, a more organized way, by not just farmer by farmer, but by drainages, by areas. So we have 6 of them in the county. They organize, each of them put one person into the Ag Water Board, which coordinates a lot of their work. And we do all these different things. Our goals is to try to be an accountable, sustained voice for good natural resource policy, and address all these issues: water quality, quantity, drainage, flooding, habitat, and land use, all together rather than in individual silos. And we believe this is important not only to us, obviously, but also to the rest of the community, because if we are not successful in this, we are into a very different place where rural sprawl will be the norm, and Puyallup and Kent Valley will be our future. And we don't want that to happen, and we hope the rest of the community would agree with that. We're going forward with these different districts. Flood Control Board, all the other organizations are kind of around working with us, drainage districts, diking districts, all these, that's part of our model forward. Working on a number of different tools that we've developed over the years. And I don't want to go through each one of these, so maybe we'll get a chance to answer some in the questions. But again, this issue of a natural resource marketplace is something that's pretty unique and very interesting, and it's developing here, where we could trade water rights for development rights and ecosystem services, which is something that doesn't occur very easily. And but working to try to be smarter about our public policy has been our goal. A number of other tools of the trade. We're doing transfers, we're doing storage, we're augmenting streams at times when we're actually putting water from wells into streams that are challenged for flow at certain times of the year. All these things are possible if we work together to do them and identify who needs to do what and how it's going to get done. Technology, I mentioned innovation is a big part of what we do. We have started an ag show, and usually in early December, late November each year. We didn't this past year. It's our first year off for a while. But we take the fairgrounds, horse arena, the fairgrounds, which was not designed for a conference center, but we actually transformed that whole horse arena by leveling it all out, putting down both sod and plywood or floorboard, and creating a conference center and an ag show. It's a big effort, but it's really fun. If you get a chance to just come out and take a look at the new machinery related to berry harvesting, it'd be really interesting to do so. And then we are in the Raspberry Commission, which I'm also part of. We're investing about $1.5 million into a breeding program at WSU. This is kind of the unveiling of that at Martin Stadium a couple years ago. The WSU president, the Enfield family locally, who are very prominent in our berry industry, and some of the other WSU brass. This is an example of trying to use the latest in technology to make sure that our berry farmers are at the cutting edge of producing the best varieties that help us compete with a lot of the other places all around the world. So how does the rest of the community engage? Hopefully communicating with our elected leaders that farming matters, that we care about farming, and that we do want wise water and labor policies. And we'd like to buy local if you get the chance. Please do. Farmers market, other local products, and look to see at least that the food you buy is produced in the USA rather than from all of our competitors. And then stay informed. We have a partner organization I work with a lot in our same building called Whatcom Family Farmers. They're actually doing an online auction starting tomorrow. So if you get a chance, look them up and help contribute to them if you're interested in that. At least be aware of what they're doing. They're sort of our messaging arm to try to get our word out to the rest of the public. So look them up and see what's up with that organization. And then I've got a number of resources here too, websites that you can look at. As I mentioned, Family Farmers, WSU Extension still is a big part of supporting our industry here. I'm with the Ag Water Board, the Seed Potato and the Raspberry Commission, Blueberry Commission's a site there, and dairy, of course, is still a big part of our whole community. So that's a quick run through of agriculture, and hopefully I'm on time and have a time for a few questions. Thank you.
Henry, let me start out the question. As you talk every day with multi-generational farmers, what is their current attitude about their future, their business, in light of all the pressures that you talked about?
That's a really good question, Paul. Normally they're committed to, they are deeply into farming for generational, and they are hoping their kids would be part of the future here. That really is the predominant thing. This last year has been tough. I gotta admit, I've never seen it as tough. COVID obviously is part of that, but there are two big issues. This water right adjudication. If it goes as we expect it to go, it is going to really take away a lot of water that is currently exists from agriculture, and also make it almost impossible to look into the future in a very positive way. So the option will be those 4,000, legitimate buildable lots out in the middle of agriculture going to end up being sold off. And the joke amongst farmers now is who are you going to hire, a lawyer or a realtor? Because I hate that, but it's on people's mind. The other one that is equally very troubling is the labor issue. Washington State, along with most of the states in the nation, have had an exemption for overtime for agriculture. Because when you're picking berries or when the harvest is on, farmers aren't working 40-hour weeks. They're working 120-hour weeks, or if that exists. They're working constantly. And our workers are working in the 60, 80, hour weeks as well. And there's always been an exemption for overtime for agriculture. Well, California started down that route a couple of years ago about scaling back that exemption. And Washington courts made a huge jump into that last year. And they said essentially that it's going to be 40 hours from now on. And then they even talked about having the 3 years of retro payments, going back 3 years to pay. And farmers have been fighting that in the legislature this year. I think that retro part is kind of taken care of, but we are going to lose the ag overtime exemption. We're still hoping to scale it back over a couple of years rather than just lose it completely right away and making us completely uncompetitive with all the rest of the states as well as the rest of the world. But those two things have put a big cloud over ag.
Other questions for Henry?
Henry, this is John Dunn. I'm concerned about the, I guess, urban sprawl from Bellingham and the issue of housing density. I'm not sure that there's much can be done to discourage people from building out in the county. I think it's going to happen. But in terms of preserving water, Has there been any consideration given to trucking water to new sites that are not allowed to drill wells?
I know there was in Skagit, there's been some of that, but it's usually for trucking for residential purposes, so it's
Right.
reasonably, the amount of water we use for irrigation makes that look pretty, that's not feasible. So we really, irrigation requires a lot of water. And we are predominantly pumping out of wells. We are not using a lot of surface water, either out of the river or out of the streams. It's 80-90% out of groundwater. The question has been, when you pump those groundwater wells down seasonally, they always come up in the winter again. But in the summer, when you draw them down, are you drawing off some of the flows in the streams and the ditches that are nearby, and therefore reducing the flows for summer flows in the river and for fish? It's a fair question. We think that, there's answers to help address that. But yeah, trucking is not likely an option for farming.
No, I wasn't thinking about farmers. I was thinking about making a requirement that any new construction for housing out in the county would require no wells, but water be trucked into them.
Fair enough. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that properly. But I would say that the issue of new housing in the middle of farming is not so much the amount of water they use, which is pretty insignificant. It's how those houses affect the farming around them, the land they take out of production. And then, how it is. You come out there and you find this nice, beautiful view site, and you build this multi-million-dollar house, and then, somebody, the dairy farmer, just down the road, starts spreading manure, and you don't like it. And even though they have a right to farm law, it can really impact an agriculture operation.
Thank you.
Mr. Burley?
Yes.
This is Steve Hager. I was just wondering, I assume because there was no mention of the, and I know there's a word that I have a hard time pronouncing, but I assume the technology for taking salt out of the salt water, making it into fresh water, has not progressed very far.
It's desalinization, and it has worked in some of the little islands around here that have used some of that for water supply. But, we think, it's not like that couldn't happen. We think there's a lot of better options in terms of managing our water than having to go through that kind of rather expensive. And again, the volumes that we'd need is more than what that would probably be able to do.
Thank you.
Henry, maybe I have a quick question. This is Catherine. And I'm just curious about the border situation. And it sounds like there's a lot of people crossing the border to work on the berries.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? So the restrictions of Canada and the US has not affected that?
No, it was, obviously it was a huge concern. Canada borders is still closed, to any normal trade, but it's essential. Farming is essential services on both sides of the border, and that has not been impacted. In fact, they probably have got through a lot easier without a lot of competition the last few years, from tourists and everything else. So we have not seen that, on our list of potential problems. That's one we've been able to cross off.
Yeah, well, that's great. Good. Yeah, we love those berries.
Great.
So Henry, on that note of, you're all in the Fraser Valley, you're all part of the same kind of system. How is Canada handling these kind of questions?
Good question. They certainly have a rigid land use protection program there in Canada. It's hard to transition out of agriculture into the cities or rural sprawl. They don't allow rural sprawl like we do. But that has made, that's what is kind of at the root of a lot of our issues, is that our values have gone sky high in agricultural land because of that proximity to the border. back in the, for many years, $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 an acre land was sort of the norm, and it still is, like in Skagit, probably up to 10, 12 maybe now. We're double that. Our land values are in the 20s to 30s thousand per acre. And a lot of that's because up in Canada, it's in the triple figures per acre because of that land use, their protection zone. That land is such at a premium up there, and they are protecting it that way that the agricultural lands are selling for 100,000 plus an acre. And they can come across the border and buy our land for a third of that. And therefore they do. They don't want to go to Skagit County as bad because it's quite a bit longer trip. So that impacts us. How, groundwater, the water up there, they've dealt with a lot more easily than, they just actually have a new groundwater code in the last 10 years. They've never had a need for a water right if you drilled a well up in Canada until about 10 years ago. Whereas we put our groundwater code in 1945. So we've been, we are been more tight on water restrictions, and they've been a lot more tight on land use.
Peter, are we getting to the end here, schedule-wise?
Time for one or two more questions.
Okay.
Maybe I have one additional question. This is Catherine again. Henry, are all the different stakeholders in this negotiation, this collaborative, is it water management plan that you're developing? Is everybody equally as interested in having that collaborative approach? Have they learned once they're in it that there's some real advantages to that, or are you constantly trying to keep people into it and keep people on the same path?
That's a good question too. Probably the latter. I think we've certainly had commitments from everybody, and the major water interests, of course, are the cities, the tribes, and us, frankly, and the PUD. Really, those four. I would say the PUD and us have been always at the table, always trying to figure out how we can make this work, because we've got a lot to lose to not do it that way. The tribes tend to come in and out, to be honest. Right now, they're kind of saying that, hey, they want a court case. They want this. They want an adjudication. They want that filed because they believe that will then drive everybody to a better solution. And that may have some truth to it, but our question has been why we don't need to be driven to a solution. We are already driven to a solution. We have way too much to lose to go into that kind of a setting. So there's a mix about it. The tribes are now saying they're not going to participate in any collaborative approaches unless we're in court. And we're kind of saying that if we're in court, it's going to be really hard for us to be in a collaborative approach. So we got that going on right now.
Getting dizzy.
Yep. It's something that has to get resolved. Something has to break, and we hope to do better.
Easy while you're sitting.
What's that?
Todd? No, it looks like you haven't had any water at all.
No, I have.
Yeah,
Tiny.
yeah, that's it's a background noise for us. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Henry, thank you for a fantastic presentation, and thank you for the leadership and advocacy you provide for our agricultural community in the county. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you all. Appreciate the audience. And thank you, Paul.
Yep. Thank you.